All right. Well, first of all, thank you, Daniel, for agreeing to record these three segments related to the Senate compromise bill that has been worked and recently announced. My name is David Trahan. I'm the executive director of the Sportsmen's Alliance of Maine. We had a major role in helping to put some provisions in that federal legislation. And so I thought it appropriate to come on and explain. A lot of people are calling and emailing with questions related to it, wanting to know what's in it. A lot of people are saying it doesn't seem to be dramatic or controversial or extreme, and really want to learn more about it. And so that's a good thing. So I'm going to do this in three segments so that people can watch shorter segments. It is complicated. A lot of the policy in it's complicated. I'll do my best to cover, I think, what else, the five major components of it and why they're in there. So I'll begin with the first provision. It does increase the background checks for gun buyers. Now, that seems controversial when you first say it, but it is connected to the proposal that would have raised the age from 18 to 21 when purchasing firearms. Right now, an 18-year-old has to wait until they're 21 to purchase a handgun. We felt a blanket provision was too extreme and thought, and we offered this idea weeks prior to the announcement, that currently under our juvenile justice system, which has really not seen a major reform for decades, juveniles who commit acts of violence using weapons, they get treated, I think, very uniquely, and that is they have sometimes their records are expunged when they turn 18. They're not considered sort of as an indicator of a person's violent tendencies. So what we said was, instead of a blanket 18 to 21-year-old change, why don't you include the records of potentially violent juveniles when in the NICS system when purchasing a firearm? Now, that doesn't mean you're going to be prohibited. It just means that there are certain, in our opinion, certain crimes that are so severe when a person is a juvenile that they should at least be considered when purchasing firearms between the age of 18 and 21. So Congress took a look at that, and they have included a provision very similar to what we were suggesting. The second component is red flag laws. This becomes more complicated. Traditionally, red flags have meant, and some states have adopted them, I believe 19, that use extremely low standards in virtually no due process. They pass laws that allow family members, significant others, to petition the court, what's called ex post facto, without your knowledge and without any proof of a crime or even a hint of a crime being committed, to have your firearms taken away. Now, that's never really seen a constitutional challenge. I think it should. Our organization has objected to a process to take a person's rights away that are laid out in the Constitution without their knowledge, without due process, and then the individual is forced to try to prove that they are not a danger to themselves or others. Well, what happened was there was another provision, and I objected to it during legislative testimony, where a search warrant was issued during that process. Search warrants are used when there is some evidence of a crime having been committed in the area to be searched. What I said was, how can anyone justify a search warrant when the search warrant is based on somebody's complaint and no proof of a crime? So what happened was we ended up entering into negotiations with the Mills administration, some of the best legal minds in the state, and said, we can do better than that. If we're going to do something like this, we should have the highest levels of due process. And when taking a person's liberty away, ensure that their rights are honored. We did that. We created what was so-called yellow flag legislation. It's the press's name, not ours. All we did was reform the protective custody statute. For decades, there's been a provision in law that allowed police officers, when they have a probable cause to believe a person is a danger to themselves or others, can put them into protective custody for 18 hours as a cool down period and an opportunity to get them some help that they may need. And that's to reduce suicides and potentially violent acts. We reformed that process to do several things. We instituted the highest levels of due process in when a person's firearms rights are taken away, a process by which the first things that had to happen was the probable cause by the police officer, a medical assessment to confirm that by a doctor or medical professional, and then a third visit to a judge, and have the judge be the third and confirming factor before a person's firearms can be taken away. That included, for those indigent individuals who couldn't afford a lawyer, to have representation as well. We created processes for an individual, if they did have their firearms taken away, to have them returned within a year. In addition to that, we linked those individuals to mental health services when they were released out of protective custody. All of those provisions were meant as much to protect the individual as potential violent acts against others. And so during that process, and most people don't know it, Moms Demand Action and others vehemently opposed those changes. The press and others, like the Press Herald, who I'll get to their editorial in the next 2 segments from now, saw that as a threat to red flag and have actually ridiculed us for establishing the highest levels of due process, rights guaranteed under the Constitution. Why that is incredibly hypocritical, particularly for the press, is that imagine for a moment that I proposed legislation that said, for all press outlets that I believe are providing this information to the public, I can petition the court to have their right to speak and operate as a press outlet taken away until they can prove that they aren't providing this information to the public. That example I just gave is why when a constitutional freedom is deprived, or an individual's liberty is deprived, it's essential that we use past court precedent to honor individual rights and balance that with the public safety. I'll get to more of their editorial in a little bit, but I wanted to describe what red flag was. Now, the conclusion to this is, in our discussions in the creation of the federal package, there were many legal minds in Washington, D.C. who recognized that we had created a better process than red flag. The proposed legislation that will come out incorporates language that eliminates red flag and creates these protection from abuse orders and these extreme protection orders in a way that allows Maine's high due process components to be included in their federal grant program. In other words, we showed the best legal minds in this nation a better way to do that, do this red flag and yellow flag in a way that protects due process and individual rights. That's a direct threat to the people who don't really care about that as much as taking as many guns away from legal law-abiding citizens as possible. We are constantly in battles with these gun control groups, the media, members of the legislature, to weaken and water down what we did, because that's not really their motives. It's not all about protecting lives and reducing suicides for some people. It's their contempt and hatred of firearms and their desire to take them out of circulation and away from even law-abiding citizens. So let's just cut right to the chase. I'm not going to mince words with what I'm seeing happening. And I guess my organization is insulted by some of what's being said around the work that we've been doing to try to make our communities safe. With that, I'm gonna ask Daniel, do you have any questions? Becky, do you have any questions? And I'll move into the second segment of this presentation.
In the federal gun proposal, is there anything in there that they're looking at as far as a outright ban or ban on magazines or anything like that?
No, there are no what most of us in the gun rights community would consider poison pills or extreme measures. There's nothing in there, in my opinion. We help to shape most of what's in there because Maine has already done most of what's in that package. We just need the federal funding to implement it. So no, there's nothing really there that scares me or in addition, most of these policies have been vetted by the National Rifle Association and gun owners of Maine. And we all knew what was in the so-called red flag and we all signed off on it. So, there's nothing in there at this point. Now, when final language comes out, that could change. But I made it clear that for us to participate, there can be no sneaking in the back door language or policies that we don't support ending up in this package, or we'll walk away.
Yeah,
Well,
go
one
ahead.
more thing, Daniel. One of the provisions I really like in the federal legislation creates a penalty process for people who make a false claim to have a person's firearms taken away. We all know that there are situations, particularly with families and friends, that turn really messy and ugly. We can't allow individuals to use this threat of having your rights taken away as a weapon to punish you or to inflict pain and suffering on an individual when they've done nothing wrong.
And I absolutely think that is a very important um, piece to put in there as well. I also wanted to ask you about the proposal to do more training for schools, school administrators, and school staff.
Absolutely. That was a major piece important to my organization. We've already created, and Sam did, Sportsman's Alliance of Maine led the effort to create the Maine School Safety Center to look at security across Maine in Maine schools and when necessary, beef up that security. For quite a bit of discussion related to the grants needed in the states to upgrade our schools and improve safety. Education, training, in particular, the shooting in Texas could have been prevented. The teacher who opened the back door of that school, she can say that she closed the door, just didn't lock all she wants. But that school back door should never be open. And when she opened that door, whether it closed or not, it was the first step in a series of human errors that led to more people being killed. You can never stop a madman. You can certainly slow him down. And if we use our resources to learn from those experiences, we can save lives. The second series of mistakes was why in the world did that gunman have an hour and 20 minutes to create carnage in that school? There were human errors throughout that process that we must learn from. But there are those that only want to do one thing. They want to make guns the reason that happened, not human error. We must resist that. Yeah, guns are part of it, but don't just focus on the guns. There were significant human errors that were part of that federal shooting, school shooting. We must learn from them. This piece is the school safety center component in every state. Every one of those school safety centers should be talking to each other. They should be learning from each other, and we should make our schools safe, just like we did our airports when terrorism was taking down our jetliners.
Agreed. I think that's all I have.
Great. With that, we'll wrap this segment up. The next segment is to talk more about the red flag law and how it compares with Maine's yellow flag. And I don't like using that. I'm going to call it protective custody reforms. So with that, thank you.
Thank you, David.